And I grew up in Dunedin and never expected to be able to learn about stained glass. I thought it was a rather closed shop that you couldn't really enter unless you were sort of lucky enough to be born into a family that did it in Europe or something like that. But I learned in Australia through the technical colleges, which are like Polytech, the basics of stained glass and surface work that you can do on glass. And I thought when I was 27 that I knew quite a lot about it. And I set up a small business in Australia making lead light and stained glass windows. And in the first week I was open, a man walked into my shop and asked to buy some edge lead for a window. And by good fortune and curiosity, I asked him who he was, where he came from and what he did. And he said, "Oh, I'm retired and I'm from England." And I said, "Well, what part of England are you from and what did you used to do?" And he said, well, you know, I was from Kensington in London, and I used to work for this company, this stained glass company called Luxfords, and we used to, you know, paint stained glass windows and repair them, and you know, we fixed all the windows in the Houses of Parliament, and he in fact taught stained glass at the Royal College of Art in Kensington. He sort of lived in William Morris territory, worked on arts and crafts windows and made them. In fact, he was probably about as well qualified as you could possibly get in the world at making stained glass windows. So I was extremely fortunate to make his acquaintance. And he invited me to dinner at his house the next day, so I went there and he cooked me a roast meal. And that day he started teaching me how to paint glass. And if you look at lead light windows, like you'll see there's a window at the back of this room right there, and it is a lead light window. It's lots of little coloured pieces of glass cut apart and assembled using lead metal strips which have slots in them at the side and sort of encase the glass and hold it together. And it is technically a lead light. It's just pieces of glass put together with lead strips. But if you look over here, you've got another lead light window, and whereas it has lots of little pieces of coloured glass assembled in a lead armature, each individual piece of glass is painted with exquisite detail using fired mineral pigments, which are painted on the glass with great skill and calm. Those pigments are fired at red heat, so the glass is heated up to red hot, and the very stable mineral pigments fuse into the surface of the glass, and you get what is considered the longest lasting form of painting that humans have devised. So it'll outlast rock paintings. If you don't smash the glass, the pigments will stay bonded onto the glass and not fade or fail. So as long as it's cooked properly, it has incredible longevity. Thousands of years just do not affect it. Whereas rock paintings do tend to degrade, and most other pigments are a lot more fugitive than that, and the base material they're painted on is much less stable. So glass is actually a remarkably good painting surface, and that is the difference between a lead light and a stained glass window. So that is a skill level that is orders of magnitude above making a lead light window. I can teach any of you in this room to make a lead light window probably in a day, and you would actually be able to make a perfectly good lead light window. It's not that hard. But you can spend your lifetime getting good at that and still not have reached the pinnacle of it. It is so deep and broad and absolutely fascinating that it's well worth spending your lifetime getting good at it. So I really like that, you might have noticed. Anyway, that's if you look at this image here, that's my family tartan in the background of this window. So if you look at the various images in there, it's a very, very Scottish window, full of Scottish imagery, and it reflects the fact that Dunedin is a remarkably Scottish settlement, and it is most unusual. Dunedin is not like every other city in New Zealand. In my opinion, it's an absolutely exceptional city. And when you look at the quality of the building and the quality of the aesthetics and the level of knowledge that is shared amongst its citizens, it is extremely refined, in my opinion. It had the first medical school and art school in the Southern Hemisphere. It established a very scientific-based university very early on. And it really took off like crazy. You know, it was a really interesting place where people were very keen to establish themselves as tasteful people who could build fabulous buildings with a lot of class and ornamentation that was organised in an intelligent and aesthetically satisfying way. So when you look at a lot of the early buildings in Dunedin, they're quite splendid. And if you go to most cities in New Zealand, you won't find buildings of this quality where many, many craftsmen have put hundreds and thousands of hours of their time into ornamenting every little detail, and you've got all the industrial capacity to make castings to go around, iron lacework castings to go around the front of your buildings. You've got glass makers and woodworkers who can put a consistent level of ornamentation throughout a building, and it has an overarching theme that matches throughout it. That's quite a rare thing. Now, what made Dunedin particularly unusual is finding 6.5 million ounces of gold in very short measure in Otago. So that really made the possibility of making massive churches, fabulous merchant homes, very grand suburbs full of splendid buildings. And this is an example of a domestic window in Dunedin. Now, so this window is a fully hand-painted window. It's in a wonderful, what I'd call a merchant home in Highgate. It belonged to a dentist called Throp when these windows were made. And he had a particular set of interests that are reflected in these windows. And if you look at the quality of these windows and the amount of effort that's gone into ornamenting them, you would not see better windows in New York or Vienna or London or any other major city in the world. The quality of this work stands up anywhere in the world. This is incredible that we have work of this quality in this city. So Dunedin's not like every other city in New Zealand. You can go to cities that were built with very little in the way of grand architecture, or none. So a lot of what I do is looking after buildings, and frequently I have to do surveys of them. So I examine the condition of all the windows in them, and one of the things I do a lot of is travelling to big buildings around Otago and elsewhere and examining them using crane access rather than drones, because when you've got crane access you can actually physically tap and touch and measure and do all sorts of things that drones can't do. So I'm often flying in a crane looking at buildings at very close range, and I get to see the level of craftsmanship on every aspect of a building, even the parts that the public normally don't see. And that's quite revealing. You realise that Dunedin had wealth, it had craftsmen who were attracted by the money. They were happy to travel halfway around the planet to come and work here because we had resources to build fabulous buildings. That's St Paul's Cathedral on the left. The little video was the crane coming down in Moray Place by First Church, and the window on the right-hand side is in Waitaki Boys High School. That's the Hall of Memories. It's the second most important Anzac memorial in New Zealand. It's built in the form of a Tudor building. It's a copy of a building in Eton, which is a funny little school in England that a few fairly influential people go to. But here's this fabulous building here, which you'd probably recognise. And it has got one absolutely splendid stained glass window right there. And I'm sure there's a really good story behind that window. Now, I don't know what the story is, but I'd be very interested to hear from anyone who knows where it came from, because I suspect very strongly that window is a Clayton and Bell window from London, and that it's been gifted to this church by someone who was lucky enough to get their hands on it. So it's a real treat, and it merits very close examination. It's extremely well painted. Clayton and Bell painted the original work that was in the chancel of St Paul's Cathedral in Dunedin. Did a lot of work in the Christchurch Cathedral and Trinity in Christchurch and various other very, very posh churches. So anyway, it's an exquisite window. It's finely painted. It's very small. The shape of it would suggest to me that it was originally a medallion in a very tall window that had a sequence of images, each representing a part of a story. So I would suspect it's part of a narrative window. It's possibly one of maybe 5 similar-sized pieces that were telling a story. So it's been removed, I think, from its original position and treasured ever since. So anyway, I had the pleasure of coming to fix your little windows, which looked like this when I started. So they were hiding behind a whole series of wooden barriers so that people could do their judo practice, I suppose, without having to worry about breaking the windows. And when we started, it was quite dirty, and I was only able to examine the windows from the outside, so it was quite revealing to get on the inside and just see the range of cobwebs and dirt and start to evaluate the condition of the windows more accurately. So when you look at the windows carefully, you'll see there's little holes punched in them. And as I went around and sort of catalogued all the damage, I noticed one thing in particular. A lot of the fractures, the breaks in the windows were a star pattern, and that tends to indicate a very high-speed impact. So if you were to put a pair of calipers on the little holes where they're intact, like the one in the bottom right there, they're about the size of a slug gun pellet. And I would suggest that it's extremely likely that some person living in that direction had a slug gun and was taking pot shots at your windows. But that's just speculation, but the evidence would be fairly strong that that was the case. So this is a painted window that you've got up there. This would have been painted by John Brock, who was a London-trained glass painter who came to Melbourne and then New Zealand in 1914 and 15, and he worked for Whitefriars in London, which meant he was extremely well trained. But it was not a very good time in Europe right then, so he quite sensibly travelled to this part of the world and started a glass painting business here. So that's some of his work. His painting style is very distinctive, and many of the pieces that he painted had actually been smashed by a local vandal, let's say. So I had to go and work out which of these painted pieces was broken, try and find some very similar glass, if not identical, as close as I could possibly get, and then I had to repaint the original pigments on the glass and fire it. And the process for doing that was basically going outside, very carefully manipulating the lead and removing the broken glass, taking that to the studio to match up to other pieces. I had to make little templates of each shape, cut a piece of the correct glass to the shape that came out of the window, bring it here and test that it fitted in the window. Once that was done, then I painted pigment on the glass, fired it in my kiln several times to build up the lines and shading that were originally painted on the glass, and then come back here and replace it into the window and then weatherproof it. So that's kind of the process that I was involved in there. And damage to a painted window is much more complex to fix, obviously, than just a plain piece of glass that needs replacing. There was a lot of plain glass that did need replacing, so I had to catalogue all that, match it all up, cut a whole lot of new pieces, and it was not the easiest thing because much of that glass probably stopped being made in 1931 when the company in Birmingham that used to roll it out collapsed after the Depression, the Great Depression. And so the only place you can get glass like that is from another building that's had it installed. Fortunately, I had to replace a window in St. Peter's in Queenstown, which was made from exactly the same glass. And I was able to use some of that glass in your church. And it matches perfectly. It's a texture that's known as Flemish texture, that sort of wavy texture that's on it. And it's in very pale tints of what I call champagne and a very pale green. There's also some mouth-blown ruby glass. The red glass in that border is a mouth-blown glass that has a tiny layer of red on one surface and is clear underneath it. So when it fractures, you see little parts where the red surface is fractured away. So that's a phenomenally expensive mouth-blown glass, only available from manufacturers in the Loire Valley and in Wulzas in Bavaria, but it's still made. So these are some of the holes in your windows, which I've removed the glass from so I can make replacements. And fortunately, a good member of your congregation here helped by taking some photos while I was working, and he's photographed me when I've been working on the windows, removing pieces of glass, trying to cut templates to replace them, and I can't take photographs of myself while I'm working, so that's really helpful to just explain the process. This is one of the border pieces that was smashed out. You can see little fragments of the border all amongst the mortar. The windows were extremely dirty inside and out, so they've had a full clean. There was all sorts of mortar had been spilt on them over years, stuck on the glass surface. The inside was covered in what spiders leave behind and all sorts of other mess. But with care and patience and skill, you can replace all those things. So this is many of the pieces of glass that were removed, and I collected all the fragments that were basically lying in the grass at the base of the building. So I ratted through the grass and sifted it all and found all the bits and then worked out how they fitted together and tried to work out what you had there originally. So that piece there is the piece of Christ's robes that was smashed at the bottom. So I was able to determine which pigments we used on it and then paint a matching piece with the same pigments on it. And all the other ones are different pieces of that Flemish texture glass, which I was able to replace. And by a tremendous stroke of luck, the diamonds that had been smashed out were fractionally smaller than the ones that came out of the Queenstown church. So I was able to just trim them down and fit them in. So that was good, because otherwise you'd have a pretty poor match in the glass, and we've ended up with a very good match. So these little painted pieces here, I had to match the painting style on these, so I had to match the tracing lines and the shading, something I'm used to doing. I have samples of all the different pigments fired onto glass, and I put them on a light box and match them all up and do test firings, and I managed to make new pieces. In this photo I'm holding a template of the diamonds, the size and shape that came out of your windows, and behind the template is a piece of green glass that came from this church in Queenstown, and I've just trimmed it down to fit your windows and managed to slip it in. And on the other side of this slide you'll see there's a plastic template with writing on it, and that's what I've used to reproduce the ruby glass that was painted and unfortunately smashed out by projectiles. Here I am in the process of trimming some of the glass to fit on site, so I'm up the scaffold covered in muck, and I've got pieces of glass and I'm gradually trimming them all to size to fit perfectly into the holes that are left in the window from removing the damaged glass. So the calm and patient attitude that you need for doing this is really critical, because you have to cut into an existing window using only enough pressure to remove the glass and not straining any part so you don't break all the surrounding glass. It's a skill that takes decades to get really good at, and most people have a lot of grief learning how to do that. It's a very tricky job. It's much easier to take a whole window out and completely rebuild it, but fixing it in situ actually takes a lot of skill. So these are just close-ups of me trimming the glass, and you can see this area here is where I've bent the lead back to allow me to remove a broken piece of blue glass, and then I've brought some blue glass to site, trimmed it down until it fits perfectly in that hole, then I've taken it home and painted pigments onto it, cooked them in the kiln, and then matched them on the light box to the original fragments that I'd removed from the window. So calm and patience really help you in this work. And there I am putting the fired piece of glass back in, and then after I've done that, then I weatherproof it using a linseed oil-based cement or putty, which is black in colour, so you don't get internal reflections around the edges of the glass, and it bonds extremely well to glass and lead, and it creates a lovely optical effect by blackening the edges of the glass, or the internal surfaces of the glass. It means that you don't get little glinting reflections around the edge, so that's actually quite helpful. And here is the window back together. So there it is with a hole in it, and there it is with the ruby glass replaced on that side. And I would guess, this is just a guess, but I would guess that that lady there, kneeling down and looking up, I'm pretty sure that someone threw a rock through her a few years ago, and then someone repainted a new piece. And it wasn't the same person who painted the original, because the painting style is a little bit different. So if you look carefully at that when you go upstairs, you'll see that. It's not a bad match. I'm not trying to be hypercritical or anything like that, But I'm just pointing out that there's a history of damage, and that is evidence of the history of damage. So anyway, it was a pleasure to get those back looking good. I didn't anticipate how much time I'd have to spend cleaning things. I probably spent the equivalent of a full day just doing cleaning work on the inside. There's just so much filth behind the covers on those windows, and there'd been generations of spiders doing all their business in there, and an awful lot of masonry dust and things like that end up falling down there. So I'd say several kilos of filth came off the surface, and around the bases of those windows was removed. So anyway, they're looking a lot better, which is nice, and I'm sure with the extra painting that's been going on, they're even better than that. So I was asked to protect the windows so that they didn't actually get smashed anymore, which is pretty good of you to do that. That is very good guardianship, I must say. And frequently on precious windows, people have tried over the years many different ways of looking after them. So one of the things they do is they put armoured glass or toughened glass or laminated glass over the top of the stained glass window. And this image here, that is a piece of toughened glass that's been put over a lead light, and it has protected it, and it's done a very good job. Probably the only thing I don't like about those is these little metal clips, that stainless steel clips that sort of enter into the sight line of the window and interfere with the view of it a little bit. But actually it's pretty good. It keeps the wind off, keeps most of the rain off, does a pretty good job. Next to it there's another wire screen protection, and the wire screen protection also stops projectiles hitting the window. It tends to form corrosion patterns on the walls of the building, so you tend to get like oxidation and rust and things like that forming a scale down the wall. And if you've got no protection at all, which you can see in this example on the other side, people will throw rocks through things, and that's in St Paul's Cathedral. It's possibly the oldest stained glass window in New Zealand. It was removed from a Sir Christopher Wren church in London when it was demolished, so it's centuries old, and it was replaced into St Paul's Cathedral in the early 20th century, not long after St Paul's was built, and it was put there by Bishop Neville, who bought it at auction in London and then shipped it out and put it into the church in Dunedin. So I'm not very happy that was broken. I had to fix it. I had to try about 4 different chemistries to try and match the painting and stain that was on the smashed pieces, and it's been smashed twice with this drunk person with a Steinlager bottle, that particular window, which is appalling. I'd really like to get some armour on that, but that's another story. I'll probably get that done in my lifetime, I'd hope, once the money comes. One of the things I'll point out is that this glass here, glass weighs quite a bit, so if you use toughened glass is the sort of stuff that's in the side windows of your car, so if it gets smashed it fragments into tiny little pieces, 3 millimetres square or so. So it shatters into hundreds of bits with a big explosion, and you don't get big shards of glass that can cut you. So a projectile can break that, and it'll crumble away. But it gives quite a good measure of protection. If you use laminated glass, which is what's in the windscreen of your car and can take massive impacts and will kind of shatter, but it won't come apart because it's 2 pieces of glass with plastic in between, a plastic called butacite, sometimes known as PCB. So laminated glass is tougher, but it weighs twice as much as toughened glass. So when you put a glass armouring onto an existing stained glass window, you're putting quite a weight loading on it. And its protection level is good, but not absolutely perfect. So I'm just trying to educate you about why I've armoured your window the way I have. So what I've tried to do is use modern materials science and adopt better materials that have higher impact resistance, lower weight, better clarity, and an ability to be cut into more complex shapes. So in this image here, that's the inside of Larnach's tomb, which has more than 100 very complex surface-worked, hand-painted stained glass elements in it, with Larnach's family heraldry illustrated all through it. And I recreated those from scratch, from R.A. Lawson's original drawings and from samples of the smashed glass, because every single one of those windows was smashed to pieces. And I sifted the gardens around his tomb in the Northern Cemetery got fragments of glass and matched them to some of the shapes in the drawings that R.A. Lawson did of these windows. And then I sent them to France and got them matched, had new glass made and sent out to me. Some of the glass was made in Australia by A. Harradence in May Street, St Peters in Sydney, where William Larnock was a customer. He was well known to the Harradence, and they still have invoices from him for buying glass. Larnock came from the Hunter Valley, just up from Sydney, so he was very familiar with all of Sydney. In fact, he was a very worldly man. So anyway, he had bought glass from Australia, but mostly from Europe for the work in his tomb and also for the work in the castle. And so when I reproduced all of those, I used exactly matching glass. But as I built them, I armoured each one with polycarbonate. So I used 6mm polycarbonate, which is what I've used on your windows. 6mm polycarbonate will stop a .22 bullet and it'll bounce off. It also weighs 1/6 the weight of glass. It's absolutely clear and it's UV treated both sides. So it'll last 50 to 70 years without clouding at all. So it's a pretty good armouring. It's what people use in visors and safety glasses and things like that. So it's very good. And just as an example, there's a window there which is kind of collapsed. That's in the St Patrick's Church in Lawrence, and I went to go and survey it, and I said to them, if you don't cover those windows, they're going to collapse. And 2 months later, there's a big storm, and several of them blew in like that. The other window on the far side there is a window in St Hilda's. It's also armoured with polycarbonate, and it's one of several hundred windows that I've made and I've armoured with polycarbonate, and not a single one has been damaged. So I've found polycarbonate to be a highly successful armouring strategy. One of the tremendous benefits of it is that you can get windows with intricate shapes that have internal points. So cusps, the little pointy bits here. So those little pointy bits, very, very difficult to cut those shapes in glass. They're not going to be stable, they're going to fail. But polycarbonate can be cut to very complex shapes, and it can also be mounted on slip-fit pins made of bronze, copper or brass, so materials that are not going to corrode, and particularly not going to corrode like iron does. When iron corrodes, it creates volumes of oxide that are much larger than the original iron. So when a nail is sitting in stone and it rusts, it forms something that expands out because it absorbs oxygen and it grows, and it will blow stone apart. So I use a slip-fit system using a non-ferrous pin, and I fix polycarbonate with stainless steel fittings, and that way there's no problems. It's just really elegant and it doesn't stress the stone at all. This is a window, an Antarctic memorial window for the Ross Sea Party of Shackleton's Transantarctic expedition, and it is completely armoured with polycarbonate. But looking at it, it's not really obvious that it is. It's quite discreet because it sits within the stonework. So you still get all the beautiful shapes of the stone, but you get full protection and full light. One of the things about wire screens is that they reduce by about a quarter the amount of light that's coming into a window. So anyway, I love armouring with polycarbonate. Is something I've developed. I've developed a whole series of attachment methods for it that Heritage New Zealand like, and it's basically changed the way people armour windows in New Zealand and overseas. So a lot of my friends who work in the United States and Europe have adopted things that I've figured out here, which is pretty weird. You can be in New Zealand and influence people elsewhere, but funnily enough, it works. So here's your windows here. And here they are fixed up, and there's some of the pins on that far side there. You can see the little copper pins in the stone. They're a slip fit, so there's no stress on the stone. Little stainless steel screw goes through the polycarbonate to hold onto them, and they just lock everything in place without stressing the stone. And the middle photo is the polycarbonate in place, but it's got a plastic cover which peels off sitting on it, because I didn't want to take that off until the builders had finished their work, so that they didn't spill more mortar all over it or anything like that. Not that I'm trying to knock the builders, they're just doing their job, and they're doing a great job. Fixed your roof, good times. Last thing I want to mention is that the people who are capable of looking after precious Dunedin buildings that are exquisitely built, you need highly skilled stonemasons, you need highly skilled builders, you need highly skilled woodworkers, highly skilled glass people. You need people who I would politely describe as almost obsessive maniacs for their particular pursuits. Most people learn course skills, but to be really good at these things, you need people who are interested in being exemplary. And Dunedin is in a sweet spot at the moment where we have some really good talent in town. We've got German-trained stonemasons, or German and English-trained stonemasons, who've done 11-year apprenticeships, training a generation of masons to do extremely good work. I've been trying to train some of them in stained glass, so we've got people who've got unique skills where they understand buildings from a very good range of perspectives, and a lot of really good work has been done, and I've tried to encourage my stonemasonry friends to work with me to help Heritage New Zealand understand some of our thinking, and that's created a really good atmosphere where everyone's kind of working together really well to look after buildings in a cooperative spirit, which doesn't always happen in architectural circles. Sometimes in architectural circles there can be difficulties and egos that clash, and all kinds of problems. Just people who believe all different things and they all want to be right, and it can end up in a mess. But at the moment we're in a sweet spot. There's a really harmonious relationship. There's a lot of skill and there's a lot of goodwill, and so I feel that fostering that kind of thing is very important. One of the things I recently managed to do was, when I was installing a window in St Paul's Cathedral, the glass that was coming out so the new window could go in was some beautiful old table rolled handmade glass from England. And coincidental with that, a beautiful big window in the Tower of St Peter's in Caversham had blown out in a storm. So this was a massive window, 3 metres tall, blew out in a storm, smashed to pieces, absolutely destroyed. Made of the same glass that was coming out of St Paul's. So I approached the Dean of St Paul's and talked to the minister at St Peter's and said, why don't you get together and just make an agreement that the glass that comes out of here can go in there, because it's exactly the same glass and the same pattern, and I could use it to make this church perfect. And because St Paul's already had some spare parts of that glass, because I've done a couple of windows there and the glass has come out, and I've disassembled the windows, recycled the lead, cleaned all the glass, put it into buckets, hidden it under the stairs by the front of St Paul's, the steps that you walk up from the octagon. So they've got the spare parts and they could spare some extra glass. So I got St Peter's at no cost to them some fabulous replacement windows made out of exactly the same original glass that they've got, and I'll be putting those in less than 2 weeks. So that's a wonderful result, and that's just talking to people in cooperation and saying, hey, why don't we could do this is a good idea, let's do it. And it's really nice when you can get Heritage New Zealand going, hey, that's a good idea, let's reuse this, let's use the original fabric of this to fix that, and let's save this church $10,000 by just simply recycling something through cooperation. And no one's losing everything and everyone's gaining something. So I like to encourage that kind of thing. Just to mention that little illustration here, that's me painting some glass. That's painting glass from Larnock's tomb. The middle section is a sculpted version of the British Royal Coat of Arms. That was something my glass painting master, Charles Wetton, and I made from hewn pine. And it's the master for all the courthouses in New South Wales. So that's been used in New South Wales and elsewhere in Australia. And we carved that original. It was copied with very clever rubber mould making, and it exists now in many bronzes, and it's also made in fiberglass as well, which was painted up to look like bronze. But if you go to any New South Wales courthouse, including the Downing Centre right in the middle of Sydney, our Royal Coat of Arms is there that we made. They use the bronze one when they've got solid masonry walls, and when they're only on light timber walls, they use a fiberglass copy because the bronze would distort the wall. So anyway, I have had a wonderful career doing fabulous things through tremendous good luck. I've been a very privileged person. One of my favourite things to do in stained glass is to incorporate the local community. So incorporate the history, the culture, the creatures, the plants, the geography, the full cultural history of this place that we live in. So I like to make windows that give people a sense of place. So that's a window called the Dunedin window, which is in St Paul's Cathedral. It has 40 different species of local animals in it. It's got little scenes from early Dunedin, including the Philip Lang and the John Wycliffe arriving in the harbour. The main image is actually the harbour, looking down the harbour from near Larnax Castle, looking over Heraweka down towards Aramoana and Tairoa Head. And for St Cecilia in that window, Kiri Te Kanawa posed as St Cecilia for us. So we were able to incorporate local people, including the then Anglican Bishop of Dunedin, Calvin Wright, as St Paul. Everything in that window, including little green geckos that are up by the two cherubs, every little animal is a local animal. And the two little cherubs are actually the grandchildren of the donor who paid for the window. So every little thing in that window is a relevant element. This one here shows a lot of the sense of place that I like to incorporate, and I've got native flowers in particular in this nativity window over here. It's got the puawananga, the native New Zealand clematis. It's got the Mount Cook lily. There's a whole bunch of beautiful white native New Zealand flowers that go with Mary and her little baby Jesus there. And all the characters in it are particular people. So they're very significant people within our community. There's a couple of wise men who actually are wise men in there, and there's a couple of people who are shepherds, and they're actually shepherds. The night sky in this window is a night sky which was supplied to me by Ian Griffin. He looked up the star charts for Bethlehem in the year 0 on December the 25th and gave me a star chart. So all the stars in the night sky there are correct to that date. So anyway, I had a lot of fun with that. There's a lot going on in that window, and there's a lot of elements in all my windows, like there's a tuku panel here from Otako Marae. That's the Tears of the Albatross panel, and there's some beautiful little Pacifica things. There's our little native penguins. This is a window in St Hilda's School, and these are the two nuns who set up St Hilda's School, and I always like to think that these little blue penguins at the bottom look like the girls in St Hilda's School, who used to have a white blouse and a light blue blazer. So the little girls are sort of looking around the world, getting ready to go out and get up to mischief, and then there's a big stern yellow-eyed penguin who represents their very stern teacher, So I kind of like the characters that I put into windows. And the two nuns, I got two girls from St Hilda's to model as the nuns. One has a big oval face and the other one's got a much squarer face. They're sisters Geraldine and Etheline. And there's a photograph of them looking exactly like that in those very clothes. I got the theatre mistress from the Fortune Theatre to whip me up a couple of nuns' habits. We dressed up two girls who had the right shape of face to represent the nuns, and we modelled them in the art room and lit them. And so those are actually girls from St Hilda's in that window. And every little element in the window, there's a wee green gecko, there's keroos, there's the harbour with the SS Remuera, which is the ship these nuns came to Dunedin on. Everything in there is a significant element. So when I make a window, I make sure that everything in it means something to local people. So if you go and look at my Dunedin window and my nativity window in St Paul's Cathedral, for example, or this one in St Hilda's, you'll be able to see things that you know in it. And I find that the feeling of doing that makes people react to the windows emotionally in a way that they feel like they own the windows. They feel like those are their windows, as compared to when they see windows that come from England or Germany or Italy or wherever, and they're completely Europhile windows. There's nothing local in them. They're a generic window that's been made hundreds of times. We've got one here, but it doesn't reflect the local people. So I love the idea of reflecting local people in my work. So in summary, my life's all about looking after beautiful things, conserving the heritage that we have and illustrating the heritage that we have. So that's me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you'd like to go for a little walk up to the hallway, I'd be also happy to just answer any questions up there, because you've got some nice windows and they're now not all smashed up. So there we go. All done.
certainly is interested in stained glass, and he's got a complete book library of all these books. He doesn't know what he's going to do with them. And I got interested, as I did on my travels around Britain. And some things I've forgotten, and I don't remember the place, but it was in Norfolk. And I went to a church where the stained glass museum is, up in the in the exit of me. And then when I came down, there was a book bus outside. So I'm looking at stained glass, thinking of David, and all the windows I've seen in all the cathedrals and the little churches around Britain. And I come down and there was a book bus that I used to go out on Puff and Victoria here. So I have many memories of stained glass and interest in what happens behind the stained glass. I never knew there was a St. Helen, but there's a St. Helens stained glass in St. Albans Cathedral. So I don't know if you've seen the bird.
Not in person.
No. Well, thank you very much for coming here. Isabel and I went to the Sept Museum, and I'm thinking that would be wonderful to see that again, but it's a different one, and especially concerning our church, and that's wonderful. I hope to go upstairs one day when there's hardly anybody here, but I'm certainly not going up today. So I hope we can see them in the future. They won't be covered up too much. So thank you for coming, and thank you for such an interesting talk. Now, George, can you put your hand down around, please?
Down around?
Yeah.
Down around what?
Your chair.
I absolutely concur about your comments about David Cook. He has the best stained glass library I've ever seen. And he's a frequent visitor to my house.
Oh, no. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I love the card too. Very appropriate. Yes.
Can I ask a question? I'm lucky, my neighbours probably grew up in the 20s. There's some beautiful stained glass windows. It's not a grand house, but just there's some very lovely tulip windows. And I enjoy them when the lights are on and I can see them. But I wondered, you spoke about architects. Are architects incorporating stained glass in many houses these days? Is that something that they're interested in doing, the way that the older houses have been decorated?
That's a very good question. A lot of architects since the Bauhaus have resisted ornamentation and made modern buildings, which are some would describe as soulless concrete monstrosities that are brutal to human beings. However, they're very practical. Other people enjoy ornamentation and having symbols and meaning in stained glass in their environments. And some architects are very sensitive to that and do still do that. In fact, I've recently worked for a certain architect who lives in a very nice address in Cannington Road and made a whole range of stained glass windows for his family, which have his family name sneaked into the stained glass windows, and they have beautiful pictures of Flagstaff and Mount Cargill worked into the entranceway, and the whole thing is very thoughtful. And there's a giant window right down the end of the hallway, so there's a fantastic big window visible from the whole house. And so some architects are very sensitive to that. Others don't share that view, and I think personally that that is a loss to the world, because the power of stained glass is in the symbols and the things that are illustrated in it that mean something to the people who enjoy the space that it's in. So if you have a splendid window that represents things that people value in a building, everyone feels better every day in that building. And so I think there is tremendous value not only in ornamentation in buildings, but also in applying symbols that are meaningful to the people who use the spaces.
May I get a picture of you just in front of the,
Over here?
with perhaps one of the stained glass windows?
Oh, would you like one of yours? I could bring that back to a slide with your windows in it. Would you like that? How about that one?
Thank you.
So you can see someone's been taking pot shots all over here. It's amazing how good telephone cameras are now. I'm quite surprised. Thank you. No trouble. Is there anything further questions on that? I'm pretty good at talking about stained glass, as you might have noticed.